Mhm.
Mhm.
So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Sunday morning service for the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'm so glad that you're watching us either this morning or sometime this week. And as we start every week, I always say, if you've never been to a Center for Spiritual Living before, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you, no matter what your divine path is. And the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles, whoever you are, and wherever you find yourself on your journey of faith, you're welcome here. And so to begin this morning, Reverend Jenna Watkins is going to open us with a prayer, and then Carol Gabika is going to do a spiritual reading for us.
So if we might just gently allow our eyes to close, dropping our awareness into that heart space. Let us breathe deeply, letting go of any stresses or strains or concerns or worries, and breathing in the river of life that fills our soul with peace. We are aware that there is one source and substance of our beingness. It is that thing that we call life, God, the presence, universal life force, the river of life. Our souls are awake to the awareness that we are one with this essence. This essence flows so easily through us as we release any negations, anything that prevents us from allowing that flow of life through us. We release it and open our hearts and our minds and our lives to that greater flow of awareness, of healing, of peace, of joy. We come together today in community, a community aware that we are one with this river of life, a community that loves and supports each other, who laughs and cries together, a community of spirit, a place where we remember and go more deeply into the truth of who we are. And I know that river of life flows so deeply through Reverend Dr. Ron Fox this morning. The river of truth and wisdom and insight flows through him as he shares wisdom with us this morning. And as we listen so deeply with that wisdom within ourselves, picking up pieces of thought, idea, of truth that allow us to go more deeply into the awareness of the presence of God in our world, in our lives, in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirit. We feel ever more healed, more whole, more complete. And I give thanks this morning for all of you for being here today, for Reverend Dr. Ron, for Becky, who handles all of the logistics. I give thanks for all of you for making this moment a reality in time. And so I release my word into the spiritual law of life, knowing it is done, and so it is.
So it is.
He's 2.5, going on 20. What a spark. FaceTime is always a joy. I can never tell what will happen with my great-grandson. His mom just shakes her head and turns away to laugh. His latest toy is his dad's flashlight. He showed me how to turn it on. Taking it to the closet, he shows me. It lights up the corners. What are you looking for? See, Gamma? See? 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 Yes, I see. I feel. I know. I look in his face, his mother's face, and yes, even mine, and I see God.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was beautiful. So good morning again. And the title of the message this morning is The Search for God. And I just want to share with you, ideas for messages come in lots of different ways. And the idea for this morning's came when a friend on Facebook posted something by Rumi that I want to share with you. And here's what Rumi wrote. He said, I looked in temples, churches, and mosques, but I found the divine in my heart. So I want to take a look this morning on where is it we can search for God, and where is it excuse me, we can find God. And Wayne Muller writes about Thomas Merton, and he says Thomas Merton believes that in every one of us there's a hidden wholeness, a wholeness that can't be diminished by fears or fractured by tragedies. And Muller says, what if for one day, we actually believe this? How would we think? How would we act? And how would we choose? How would we respond differently to the world? And Carolyn Mays, who is a Catholic scholar, she writes that the closer we get to our true nature, the closer we get to God. And she gives us a couple of questions, actually 3 questions that we might ask ourselves. For what reason was I born? What is the greater purpose and meaning of my life? And how am I meant to be of service? And she says, when we ask ourselves those questions, we're actually calling out God. We're inviting God to change us at some level. We're saying, I'm ready to work with you and to be directed to my soul and my destiny. We all must reach some stage of spiritual maturity where we surrender to God. And Carolyn is a devoter, a follower of Teresa of Avila. And so she has something in her book that Teresa of Avila wrote that I want to share with you. And it's titled, You Are Christ's Hands. God has no body now on earth but yours, no hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes through which he is to look out at God's compassion to the world. Yours are the feet with which he is to go about doing good. Yours are the hands from which he is to bless men now. So let me give you one more question we can ask ourselves. Where is it that I encounter God? Where is it that I encounter God? When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He responded, to love God with all our hearts and minds, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think in there, Jesus answers the question I just asked. What that means, what he said to me, what it means is to see God in everything and to include everyone in our unity. Let me tell you a story that I think brings home the point. A learned spiritual scholar dies, and he arrives at the gates of heaven, and a voice says, "Who goes there?" And he says, "It is I." And the voice says, "Sorry, there's no room here. Go away." And he's stunned. This man has lived such a spiritual life. And he goes away and he prays and he comes back and he gets the same question: "Who goes there?" And again he says, "It is I." And the voice says, "Sorry, there's no room here. Go away." And this happens over and over again, 3 or 4 or 5 times. And finally, he goes away and he spends a great deal of time away, this time praying and meditating. And finally, he goes back one more time, and the voice says, "Who goes there?" And he says, "It is thou." And the gates open, and the voice says to him, "There never was room for 2 of us here. There's only one of us." And the point for me, the story speaks to our exquisite oneness with spirit, to the fact that spirit is closer to us than our arms and legs, than anything. We are bound forever. The late Stephen Levine is a Buddhist writer. And in one of his books, he said that he believes humanity has a will towards mystery. And he says it's our homesickness for God, a longing for a deeper knowing, a draw towards the sacred. And the truth is, wherever we are is holy ground, because God is right there with us. No matter what is going on in our life, we can always be lifted up. Something else that Jesus said was, "Your Father knows what you want before you even ask." And so the late Unity minister, Eric Butterworth, says, "That's true. Why ask?" And then he answers this question and he says, "So don't ask. Claim you're good. God is centered in us, so we need to be centered in God." And he said, all prayer is answered at the level of our consciousness. It's done unto us as we believe. What God does for us, God needs to do through us. So let me tell you another story. It's a story about a woman who's taking a walk in the woods. And she goes way further than she meant to go. And she finds she's hopelessly lost. She can't find her way out. And so she sits down under a tree and she prays that God would get her out of the woods. So now it's a week later and she's with her bridge group, and she says to them, one of the things I learned is prayer doesn't work. And one of the other women says, "What do you mean prayer doesn't work? You're here." And she says, "Yeah, I got out because a hunter came and found me. If I waited for God to answer my prayer, I'd still be there." Think about that. Really? Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Center for Spiritual Living, wrote, "Prayer is not an act of overcoming God's reluctance, but should be an act of acceptance of his highest willingness." So a few years ago, when we were doing book groups, actually when Ginny was still here and doing a book group, we read a book by Barbara DeAngelis. And in the book, in one of the chapters, she describes a dream that she had. And she said, in the dream, she's on an obstacle course. And it's a really difficult obstacle course. A lot of large hurdles, and she's going through it. And she says, and all of a sudden, she comes to this large wooden structure, and it goes high up into the air. She said, it's so high up in my dream, I couldn't even see the top of it. And somehow she knew she had to get to the other side, that it was a matter of life or death. She couldn't go back. She had to go forward. And as she looked at it, she saw these looped ropes that were hanging down that looked like footholds and handholds. So she begins to climb, and she climbs and climbs, and soon there are fewer and fewer footholds, and eventually there are none. So she goes back down, and she goes to a different side of this structure, and she climbs again. And again it happens. There's fewer and fewer footholds, and eventually none. And she's really tired now, but she goes back down, goes back up, and the same thing happens. And about the fourth time or so that she goes up, she hears a voice. And the voice says to her, "This time, when the ropes disappear, look closely." And so she looks really closely and really carefully, and she sees a tiny crack. And she looks in the crack, and she sees a tiny key. And she looks a few inches over, and she sees a tiny keyhole. And then she hears the voice again, and it says, "Dear one, this isn't a wall, it's a door." And she puts the key in the keyhole and turns it, and she's filled with light and love. It wasn't a wall to climb over. It was a door to go through. What looked like a wall was a doorway, and she goes through. And she said what she needed was to stop being a seeker and be a seer. And the lesson, she said, is we don't need to climb over obstacles. We need to go through them, because that's where our healing is, and that's where our freedom is. So let me tell you another story. It's about two young fish that are swimming in the water, and an older fish, they're swimming this way, and an older fish comes swimming in the opposite direction, and he says to him, "Hey guys, how you doing? How's the water?" And the two young fish keep on swimming, and after a little while, one turns to the other and he says, "What the heck is water?" And the point is, we need to wake up and be conscious, realizing that we've been lost in the first place is the first step to being found. When we ask, "What is water?" you realize that you've been swimming in something you didn't know existed. And when you're no longer just seeking, you're seeing. Why have I been disconnected is the first step to being connected. Why have I been stuck is the first step to being unstuck. So here's a few more questions we can ask ourselves along this spiritual path. How can I realize my oneness with spirit? What would I have to stop doing? What would I have to begin doing on a consistent basis? So when I was preparing this, I thought it might be a good idea to pass along some rituals we can use in our everyday life to help us answer the question on how can we find God. And so I want to give you a couple, and I want to start with one by Wayne Muller from his book Sabbath. And I want to read it. I'll just read you a paragraph that he wrote. And his ritual is, he titles it a Sabbath walk. For 30 minutes, walk slowly and silently. preferably outside in nature, but it can be done indoors without trying to get anywhere. It's more of an amble, a stroll. Let your senses guide your walk. If you are drawn to a leaf, a stone, a color, a chink in the concrete, a shape in the floor, a fragrance of the grass, simply stop and linger and allow the moment to be, to smell or touch or thoroughly observe whatever is available for you to hear what it says, to see what it looks like, to feel what it has to say or teach. Don't hurry. There's no place to go. Take all the time you need to hear its secrets. Then, when it's time, when the rhythm of being here gives way to the rhythm of moving along, when it's time to begin again, simply move on. Follow your own timing and curiosity. When you are called to stop, stop and investigate. When you are called to begin again, move on. That's all. At the end of 30 minutes, notice what's happened to your body, your mind, your sense of time. So that's one simple ritual. You know, some other simple things we can do. We can light candles and offer a blessing or thoughts from our heart. We can sit quietly and sip a glass of wine or chew on a piece of bread and just be. We can begin our day with a morning prayer, asking Spirit to guide us through the day and to give thanks for the life that we have. We can go into nature with no agenda. Just let Spirit speak to us. And something else that Muller offers us is to choose a piece of scripture. He said the 23rd Psalm works really well, and sit quietly and then go on the Sabbath walk or just sit and ask yourself, what do you notice about the words? How do they change? And he gives an example. He talks about a woman who had cancer, and the word that spoke to her was surely, as in, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. She said simply repeating the word surely brought her great comfort and great peace. You know, years ago, I think I've talked about this before, Becky and I had a ritual that we would go through once a month. One Friday night, we closed down everything at 5 o'clock. No phones, no computer. We had a little sanctuary room. We'd go in, we'd meditate, we'd pray, and we'd have a meal. And we'd just spend the rest of that evening together, sometimes in silence, sometimes not. And then all day Saturday, we had planned trips just to be together. And some of them were fun and some of them were deeply spiritual, but it was a way of connecting with each other and connecting to the spirit within. So when I began, I said the title was The Search for God. And I thought, I had read before something by Rabbi Harold Kushner, where he talks in one of his books about the question, where is God? Where is God? So before I end, I wanted to deal with that. So he gives two answers to the question, where is God? One of them is from the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who said, the answer is that God is found in relationships. God is found between people. When we're attuned to each other, God comes down and fills the spaces so we're connected, we're not separated. And then Kushner answers his own question. He said, when people ask him, where is God? He says, that's not the question to ask. The question to ask is, when is God? When is God? Because finding God isn't a matter of being in the right place, but rather doing the right thing. He said, when we make room to do the things that make us truly human, then we find God. When we get over being stuck on ourselves, we make room for God. And so I want to close. I read this, I think a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, but I want to close with this. It's something that was written by Brother Lawrence, who was a Carmelite friar in the 17th century. And here's what he wrote. I am living and moving and having my being in the Word of God, keeping the Word of God alive in me, abiding in the Word and letting the Word abide in me. I know when I arise in the morning, or even before arising, on first awakening in the morning, it becomes necessary to consciously remember that this is God's day and God goes before me to make crooked places straight. God goes before me to bless. God will be with me every step of the way. Omnipresence guarantees that if I go up to heaven, I will find God. If I make my bed in hell, I will find God. If I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will find God. And there will be no time during the day when will be outside the realm of God. I will keep my mind stayed on God. I will acquaint myself now with him and acknowledge him in all my ways. That's how we find God. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a great week.